I worked with this crazy psychologist. He used to put jokes on his multiple choice tests. He was a really eccentric guy, but I really liked his courses. He taught a course on creativity, and he was also a prison psychologist. And he was an eccentric guy, and he, for some reason, liked me, and maybe because I was eccentric too. And he invited me to go out to the Edmonton Maximum Security Prison with him a couple of times, which I did. And that was a very interesting experience because I was trying to figure out what role each individual's behavior bore to the pathology of the group. It was something like that. And I went out there and I met a little guy, smaller than me. I was a little bigger by then. And he was a pretty innocuous guy. And what had happened was I was out in this gymnasium. It looks like a high school, the prison, which is really quite telling in my estimation. And there were all these like monsters in there weightlifting, and like they were monsters. I remember one guy who was tattooed everywhere, and he had like a huge scar running down the middle of his chest. It looked like someone had hit him with an axe, and and I was in there, and I had this weird cape that I used to wear that I bought in Portugal, and some boots that went along with it. And yeah, it was like an 1890s Sherlock Holmes cape, and it was really like it was from the 1890s because this little village was up on a hill. It was a walled city on a hill, and they sold these things, and I don't think they'd changed the style since 1890, and so I thought they were really cool, and so I was wearing that, which wasn't perhaps the most conservative garb to don if you're going to go to a maximum security prison. So anyways, I was in the gymnasium, and the psychologist left, and God only knows. I mean, that's what he was like. And all these guys came around me, and they were offering to trade their prison clothes for my cape, and it was it was like I was being made an offer I couldn't refuse, and so I didn't really know what to do. And then this little guy said something like that the psychologist sent me to come and take you away, or something like that. And so I thought, well, better this little guy than all these monsters. So we went outside the gym through some doors, like school doors. We went outside the gym into the exercise yard, I guess, and we were wandering along, and he was talking to me, and he seemed like a kind of an innocuous guy. And then the psychologist showed up at the door and motioned us back, and so, which was kind of a relief. And so I went into his office, and he said, "You know that guy that you walked out in the yard with?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, he took two cops one night, and he had them kneel down, and while they were begging for their lives, he shot them both in the back of the head. And I thought, see, the thing that was so interesting was that he was so innocuous, right? Because what you'd hope is that someone like that would be very much unlike you, let's say, and certainly wouldn't be like someone innocuous that you'd met. What you'd want is that the guy would be like, half werewolf and half vampire, so you could just tell right away that he was a cold-blooded killer. But no, he was this sort of ineffectual little guy who was certainly not ineffectual if you gave him a revolver and the upper hand. And so that made me think a lot about the relationship between being innocuous and being dangerous. And then another thing happened. I met another guy out there, and then a week or two later I heard that he and a friend of his had held another guy down and pulverized his left leg with a lead pipe, like just pulverized it. And the reason for that was that they thought that he was a snitch, and maybe he was. And that time I did something different. Instead of being shocked and horrified by that, although I certainly was, I thought, how in the world could you do that? Because I didn't think I could do that. I thought that there was a qualitative distinction between me and those people. And so I spent about 2 weeks trying to see if I could figure out under what conditions I could do that. Like what kind of psychological transformation I would have to undergo to be able to do that. And so that was a meditative exercise, let's say. And it only took about 10 days for me to realize that not only could I do that, that it would be a hell of a lot easier than I thought it would be. And that's sort of where that wall between me and what Jung described as the shadow started to fall apart. And that also was very useful because I started to treat myself as a somewhat different entity, because I hadn't been aware up to that point, because I thought I was a good guy. And there's no reason for me to think that, because you're not a good guy unless you've really made a bloody effort to be a good guy. You're just not. It's not easy. And so you're probably a moderately bad guy. And that's a long ways from being an absolutely horrible guy, but it's also a long ways from being a good guy. And so, but I had a little more respect for myself after that, because I also understood that there was a monstrous element to the human psyche that you needed to respect. And that was part of you, that you should regard yourself in some sense as a loaded weapon. It's very useful around children to regard yourself as a loaded weapon, because around children you are a loaded weapon. And the terrible experiences that many children have with their parents are testament to that. Had to be insane to be sane within them. Murderous underground currents of resentment and rage manifesting themselves over decades, painted over with a facade of loving kindness and benevolence. Horrible. The personality that I want to talk about today, it's composed of a downward spiral. And I think that's why people have always envisioned hell in some sense as a bottomless pit. Hell is a bottomless pit because no matter how bad it is, there's some stupid thing you can do to make it worse. And so the spiraling is indicative of a positive feedback loop where A causes B and B causes C and then C causes A, and everything moves out of control. The case study that I want to present to you today is one of the more literate of the Columbine killers, whose name was Eric Harris. People wonder why the mass shooters do what they do, which in some sense is quite surprising to me, because if you read what they say, they tell you why they do what they do. Now, why people don't believe that is not clear to me, except that I think that if you do take them at their word, it raises all sorts of specters that we would rather have hidden. Eric Harris became possessed, I would say, of his own free choice by a personality that was composed of ideological rigidity, pride, resentment, deception, and vengefulness. I'm going to read you some of his comments about government systems. When people do analysis of the Nazi state, again, generally the analysis is conducted at a socio-political or economic level. The economic analysis and our obsession with it is probably a hangover from our familiarity with Marxist analysis, which really hasn't gone out of style in some sense, especially in the universities. It's sort of switched from economic reasons motivate everything to reasons of power motivate everything, which is basically the same argument, slightly differently phrased. One thing that's not addressed by that level of analysis is, why would you find the Nazi actions and intent attractive, personally? Not as a sociological puppet, but as a free-thinking, reasonably conscious being characterized by free will. Here's Harris's comments with regards to ideological rigidity. Like the early Nazi government, my brain is like a sponge, sucking up everything that sounds cool and leaving out all that is worthless. That's how Nazism was formed, and that's how I will be too. Hitler and his head boys messed up a few times, and it cost them the war. But I love their beliefs and who they were, what they did and what they wanted. I love the Nazis too. By the way, I can't get enough of the swastika, the SS, and the Iron Cross. It's not that he didn't understand the Nazis. He understood them perfectly well. Whatever else you might say about Eric Harris, he wasn't stupid. Pride. People. Parents, cops, God, teachers telling me what to do, think, say, act, and everything else just makes me not want to do it. That's why my nickname is Rebel. Reb, actually. No one is worthy of anything unless I say they are. I feel like God. I wish I was. having everyone being officially lower than me. I already know that I'm higher than almost anyone in the world in terms of universal intelligence. I feel ever more confident, stronger, and more godlike. And I have confidence in my ability to deceive people. I have thought too much, realized too much, found out too much, and I'm too self-aware to just stop what I am thinking and go back to society because what I do and think isn't right or morally accepted. No, 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 I would sooner die than betray my own thoughts. But before I leave this worthless place, I will kill whoever I deem unfit for anything at all. This is from Paradise Lost, the great poem by John Milton. These are the words that he puts into the mouth of Satan after he's flung from heaven for daring to oppose and attempt to transcend the Most High, as his desire was not only to be like God, but to be superior to God. And in some sense, he's a symbol, in some very important sense, he's a symbol or a representation, you could say, which is more accurate, of the ultimate in intellectual pride, which says, everything I know is sufficient, and there's nothing transcendent beyond that. Milton has Satan say, "Farewell, happy fields where joy forever dwells. Hail, horrors. Hail, infernal world. And thou, profoundest hell, receive thy new possessor, one who brings a mind not to be changed by place or time." Resentment. I've noticed in my clinical practice that there are three characterological elements that really do people in. And weirdly enough, they're not really listed in the psychiatric list of diagnosis. And they're often also not discussed as causal elements in the genesis of mental illness and suffering, even though in my experience they're actually the primary causes. Arrogance, which is I already know enough. Deceit, which is I can twist the fabric of reality in my favor for my individual wants, and I can get away with it, which goes along with pride and arrogance. And then resentment, which is the world is tragic, which is of course true. The world is unjust and tragic, which is more debatable. And the injustice and tragedy of the world is aimed at me, specifically and unfairly. Well, that's just not true at all. Resentment. I hate you people for leaving me out of so many fun things. And no, don't say, well, that's your fault. Because it isn't. You people had my phone number. And I asked and all, but no, no, no. Don't let the weird-looking Eric kid come along. Oh, no. You people could have shown more respect, treated me better, asked for my knowledge or guidance more, treated me more like a senior, and maybe I wouldn't have been as ready to tear your heads off. Milton, again, Paradise Lost, has Satan say, "The more I see pleasures about me, so much more I feel torment within me. As from the hateful siege of contraries, all good to me becomes bane, and in heaven much worse would be my state. But neither here seek I, no, nor in heaven to dwell, unless by mastering heaven supreme, nor hope to be myself less miserable by what I seek, but others to make such as I, though thereby worse to me redound. For only in destroying do I find ease to my relentless thoughts." Eric Harris again. Then again, I have always hated how I looked. I make fun of people who look like me, sometimes without even thinking, sometimes just because I want to rip on myself. That's where a lot of hate grows from. This is Richard III from Shakespeare. Richard III. "I shall despair. There is no creature loves me, and if I die, no soul will pity me. Nay, wherefore should they, since that I myself find in myself no pity to myself." Deception. You know what? I feel like telling about lies. I lie a lot, almost constantly, and to everybody, just to keep my own ass out of the water. And by the way, I don't think I'm doing this for attention, as some people may think. Let's see. What are some big lies I've told? Yeah, I stopped smoking. Yeah, I'm sorry for doing it, not for getting caught. No, I haven't been making more bombs. No, I wouldn't do that. And of course, countless other ones. Yeah, I know that I hate liars, and I am one myself. Oh well, it's okay if I'm a hypocrite, but no one else. Because I'm higher than you people no matter what you say, and if you disagree, I would shoot you. If you take the personality elements that we've already discussed and you mix them up and you let them run as a process, you get the positive feedback loop that I was describing earlier, and it has something to do, it goes something like this. And I learned this in part from the analysis of the story of Cain and Abel. In Genesis, the first story about real human beings is the story about Cain and Abel, because Adam and Eve were made by God, right? So, you know, you can't really call them normal humans. Cain and Abel are the first humans. And Cain is very resentful and deceitful and vengeful. And the reason for that, which it's clearly explained in the story, is that Cain's sacrifices aren't accepted by God. Now, it's hard for modern people to understand what a sacrifice is, because why would you offer up to God some burnt remnant of an animal, for example? But, you know, people